Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard and welcome to the last Tournament Tactician before the big seasonal edition one that I will try to have out next Wednesday so that you have a couple of days to take the information that I give you and use it rather than sort of this coming out on Friday and you just jumping into the weekend with it. So, this weekend, obviously, we have the Master and Terra Championship. The qualifiers, the 6 of them, been going on for over a month, are over. 64 players are moving on to this $5,000 main event. And if you were not invited to that, then there is an online league series that is still happening. Signups for that will be in the description below, so that you still have a little bit of last-minute seasonal testing to get in case you didn't qualify for the big event. Now, as far as the tier list goes, I went back and I tier 1 looked really small, and then tier 2 looked really small, and I was feeling some type of way about that. And then I went and I looked over the data for the entire format, which is only 3 weeks. It's really not a long meta that we've been in, and it really sort of supported everything that I was thinking, which always feels nice. So obviously Ari Kennan's still going to be tier 1. Relentless Pursuit and Absolver sort of picking up as the main 2 versions. Go Hard starting off strong and then falling off later in the meta, but still doing fine. Darkness still just popping up in every tournament, and I think while Darkness is starting to fall off play rate wise, I have had Darkness in tier 1 for previous seasonals because it feels like if you are a good Darkness player, you are going to do well with the deck. When players scrub out of an event and they go on Twitter and they talk about, hey, this was the individual record for each deck that I played, this is how many times it was banned, this was my game score on each of it. First of all, I love it when players do that. Second of all, I've never seen anybody sort of quote Darkness as the reason that their tournament run didn't go well. Anybody who is bringing Darkness and knows what they are doing is performing well with it. No one's really scrubbing out with that, and I think Darkness is going to maintain that sort of presence going into the seasonal tournament, even though Darkness sort of initially came out as an Ari Kennan counter, and then Ari Kennan players, from my understanding, have sort of learned how to deal with Darkness a little bit better, especially with the Relentless Pursuit and Absolver versions doing better into Darkness than the Go Hard version. But nobody's really on the counter Ari Kennan plan anymore. Most people have moved off of that. We're all just sort of the opinion that we should be banning it now, and Darkness still does well into just about everything else that we are seeing. And then Faded, of course, being the 3rd deck of the format, the best mid-range deck that we have right now, with Tarek again coming out of the woodworks thanks to Jarisoth winning the online league series with that, as well as the Relentless Pursuit version of Ari Kennan, and then players sort of copying that into the last Mastering and Terra qualifier. Now, it's not obvious if this was just a one-off thing that we did for the Mastering and Terra qualifier number 6, or if this is going to persist into the championship. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't. But, it does remain to be seen a little bit. There are some large disparities between Shyvana Pantheon and Pantheon Tarek's matchup charts. For example, Lurk is still not on the tier list, even though it's been picking up a little bit of popularity lately. I still do not think that Lurk is something that is going to win a tournament, so it is still not on the tier list. But it does do very well into Pantheon Shyvana, and then not so great into Pantheon Tarek. So, there are some differences here, and I think that the large presence of Pantheon Shyvana is one of the reasons that we are seeing an uptick in Lurk. But if players are swapping over to Tarek, then Lurk is going to just continue to falter. And then Pantheon Mono has actually only topped 1 time this format. It was just Sari's 2nd place finish. And then Lee Sin, permanent fixture in tier 1. So this is what I had tier 1 looking like, and then I went back and looked over the entire 3-week meta, and I noticed that Ari, Kennan, Darkness, and Pantheon were actually just the 3 most played decks in this order as well. Just so you guys know, the tier list is not ordered. Spooky Viego is not high tier 2, and Landmarks is not low tier 2. Lux Piles is not the best tier 3 deck, and Sentinel Control is not the worst tier 3 deck. But in this case, it did just happen to sort of play out. I try to keep the best deck at the top of tier 1, but that's really all the ordering that I do. So in tier 2, it feels like, to me, that Sivir Demacia is sort of the only true tier 2 deck. And when I went and looked at the stats, it depends on how you actually want to phrase it to say whether or not that supported it. So, Faded, Darkness, and Ari Kennan have all topped more than 10 times this season. Just about everything else has topped about 5 times or less, and then Sivir Demacia is actually sitting at 7. So, depending on where you want to move the goalposts, you could make it look like Sivir Demacia is the only tier 2 deck, and sort of where I had the goalposts, it's a little supported, but it's mostly irrelevant. It feels like there are so many different one-ofs that we're seeing at every tournament. Nothing is really piling on and being an obvious power choice. So Sivir Demacia is the true tier 2. Scouts, I think, is true tier 2 because it's the best aggro deck, even if it's not performing particularly well or consistently. I think that it might ramp up a little bit for the seasonal, since the seasonal meta tends to be these slower, high skill cap decks like Lee Sin and Darkness, and Scouts tends to do very well into those. So even if Scouts doesn't necessarily show up big at the online league series, I think it'll do better at the Mastering and Terra qualifier and the seasonal as it follows. Spooky Viego is something that I've been peddling for a few weeks as something that I'm a big fan of the matchup charts as. If you go and look at the matchup charts now, that that it has sort of started to pick up more popularity, you're seeing a lot of like 48% win rates, which I do think can be swapped by player skill, because I think that Kindred Viego is not the easiest deck in the world to play, so it makes sense that its ladder stats aren't phenomenal, but it did pick up the win at the Mastering Runeterra qualifier number 6, so feeling pretty confident about keeping this in tier 2 for the last couple of weeks. Iceborne Spiders does just seem a little bit better than Feel the Rush to me. Back when, like, Feel the Rush and Trundle Ladros Control were fighting for the spot of, like, you know, which Shadow Isle Failure control deck are we playing, I was a bigger fan of Feel the Rush, but now with this spider strategy, I am liking Iceborne Spiders a little bit more, especially since I'm not really a big fan of Avalanche and Bladed Ravine right now, which is one of the big things that you're getting in FTR over the Iceborne Spiders, but also I think it's just really cool that Iceborne Legacy got this buff and is now sort of doing things with it. So Iceborne Spiders I have just a little bit higher than Feel the Rush, but at the end of the day, it does feel like preference. And then Landmarks, Tier 2 feels like a spot for hot takes. Spooky Viego was a hot take a couple weeks ago. Iceborne Spiders could be considered a hot take. Landmarks might be a little bit of a hot take, but I do like what the deck is doing, and I think it's a little bit higher than some of the stuff in Tier 3. It is performing a little bit more consistently, and I think enough of the good players like this deck that it is going to have an inflated performance, and it is something that you need to be cognizant of if you're going to be entering an event. And then in Tier 3, before I talk about what's here, I want to talk about what's not here. Lurk, like I mentioned, not here. And then also, Aikado, if you're watching, TF Nami is still not on the tier list, because last week I posted the tier list on Twitter, and you were like, where's TF Nami? And I was like, yeah, you know, where is TF Nami? And then the week happened, and I was like, yeah, where is TF Nami? It didn't do anything in Mastering Runeterra qualifier number 6. It was played in a fight night, but Floppy Mudkip didn't top with it, and then Kever won with it, but that was still 2-deck fight night, and then it didn't show up at Brazil fight night, it didn't show up at Europe fight night, it didn't show up at Mastering Runeterra qualifier number 6. I have no reason to expect it to show up this weekend. Now, I didn't get to watch all of Runeterra Academy, but I did get to watch a little bit of Top Cut, and I didn't see it anywhere in there. So, yes, Aikado, where is this deck? I am asking you now, where is it? So it didn't feel right to put it on the tier list, given the complete and utter lack of performance by the deck after it came out and was a known factor outside of the 2-deck format, which is a little bit different, so not really going to let Kever's win sway me too much on that one. But TF Nami is something that, like, you should probably be aware of its existence, but I don't know, it could very well storm the gates this weekend and become very popular, but I have no reason to think that it will. No data is pointing towards it doing it. I went and checked the ladder stats. It's sitting at a very solid 50.2% win rate, so I just have no reason to assume that it is magically going to spring up this weekend and just absolutely dominate everything. But it could, and that'll be good because we figured it out before the seasonal. So that's just kind of what that is. Anyway, for the actual Tier 3, obviously, you're just looking at a lot of the same. A lot of these decks have just been sort of filling out lineups. You know, there's been 3 or 4, maybe even as high as 5 of them that have topped over the course of the season. Something like Sentinel Control actually got moved down from, it was Tier 2 last week. One of the reasons is I'm more confident in Kindred Viego, meaning that this Kindred deck does have to move down because it's overlapping with Kindred Viego. Number 2 is that when I was going through the format and looking at how many times each deck topped, Sentinel Control has topped 5 times over the last 3 weeks, but 3 of them were 4LW. And that feels like a 4LW diff more than a Kindred Elise Ezreal or Kindred Elise Vi diff. So Sentinel Control is moving down a little bit, on top of the fact that I'm not super confident for it into the meta that everything seems to be shaking out to be. Everything else pretty defensible for Tier 3, but I did want to shout out Lux Piles because these have been catching people by surprise lately. We have the Heimerdinger Lux, that Italian X. I believe he's the one that did it twice. Got 2nd place at Fight Night Brazil this week when they switched to the 3-deck format so that now I can actually use their results. And then I think he also, he got top 4 at the Mastering Runeterra qualifier number 6 with Heimerdinger Lux. And that was right after 4LW got the Zoe Lux double top at the Online League Series and Mastering Runeterra qualifier number 5. So I don't know if either of these is necessarily the perfect Lux deck, but it does feel like there is something within the Lux archetype. It might not be figured out for seasonals, but it does feel like the players that are willing to take these risks and try these decks out are finding success with it. So if you've got like a Lux deck that you've had in the back of your mind, if BBG is going to come out and randomly win the seasonal with Thresh Lux, like now's sort of the time to do it. But other than that, like, I don't really feel the need to, like, talk too much on any of these decks. None of these are, like, standing out as a particularly enticing Tier 3 option. It's just coming down to a lot of player preference on how you want to round out your meta, because, like, Tier 1 is good, but, like, they're different enough that you're not seeing an insane amount of, like, overlap on the lineups. Like, no one's really bringing Ariken Darkness and Pantheon. You'll see, like, Ariken and Pantheon, and then, like, Sivir Demacia, or some other 3rd deck that they feel like bringing. Lee Sin is an option. Scouts is an option. Spooky, like literally anything's an option. But for the most part, it's just like, are you running Ari Kennen? Are you not? Because this is still getting banned, but there are players that are still trying to counter it. And things of that nature. So like the lineups are still kind of all over the place, but we do have a very clear top end and then like a very clear tier 2 option, and then everything else is just kind of filler, and that just kind of is how it feels. I'm excited to see if the Lux Piles can upset anything. Another deck that is not on here is Iceborne Poros. I do think that despite it getting 2 Mastering Runeterra qualifier wins, that its time is kind of over. Like week 1, it came out, Extasio got the win with it, and Extasio got the win with a very weird lineup around it, and it was like, okay, yeah, maybe some people expected that, maybe some people didn't. Completely falls off for week number 2 in favor of a Zero Aurelia, and now it wins Mastering Runeterra qualifier number 6. I think that, like, not Spooky Poros, but Iceborne Poros and a Zero Aurelia are sort of figuring out where they want to stand in this slow meta. Are we actually leaning towards a slow enough place where we can play these decks? Is things too mid-range? I'm not super confident in either choice, and this is more of a wait and see for the seasonal for me on those 2 decks and those kinds of strategies specifically. But, this is kind of a wait and see week. I'm playing it a little safe. Lurk isn't here, TF Nami's not here, Zero Aurelia is not here, Iceborne Poros aren't here. Maybe they could be, maybe they should be, but they'd just be thrown in tier 3 and kind of rounding it out. As long as you are aware that those are factors and those are things that players are bringing. That's all I'm really here to do, is bring you the information. So anyway, that is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. If I were playing this weekend, I'd be playing the Online League Series, because obviously I didn't play in any of the Mastering Runeterra qualifiers. I wouldn't be in the top for that. But I would definitely be bringing Ari Kennen and Relentless Pursuit. It's the deck that I've been playing on ladder the most. I would be bringing Shyvana Pantheon, because that is the version of Pantheon that I have been playing the most. And then I'd probably bring Kindred Viego. But I feel like as long as you're on like an Ari Kennen and Pantheon/X lineup, no one's really going to fault you for whatever the X is, especially with Extasio having the success that he has this format, both with the top 4 in EU Fight Night as well as the win at the Mastering Runeterra qualifier. Really, no one can say shit about what your lineup looks like, so I'm very excited to see how he performs tomorrow at the main event. But thank you so much for watching. As always, my name is Boulevard. Links for the sign-up for the Online League Series are down below. Don't forget to check back on Wednesday for the seasonal edition of the Tournament Tactician, and I also have a cool announcement coming next week, so be on the lookout for that. Good luck in your tournaments.